Hey everyone, welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. As you know, it's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you know by now, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have a think about drugs, a wonder about medical devices, and consider cannabis or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I do these discussions because they're a lot of fun, and I find myself learning something new each time, like I'm going to learn today. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. It helps me know that you're listening and keeps these conversations going. You can always reach me on Darshan Talks on Twitter, or just go to our website, darshantalks.com. Today's podcast is going to be really interesting. We've actually had this guest over before, and she was fascinating, and people were asking about her, and we were excited to bring her back. So if you care about branding, you care about positioning, you care about how all of that fits into legal, you're probably going to care about today's discussion. Our guest today is the partner at Duane Morris in Philadelphia. She leads the fashion, retail, and consumer brands and the industry focus teams. Our guest for today, Christiane Campbell. How are you, Christy?
I'm great. How are you?
I spoke really fast, so I'm a little out of breath.
As do I. I usually start off by saying a little bit of homework here. If I speed up, because I geek out on these branding topics. If I speak too quickly, go ahead and stop me, slow me down. I'm trying to get better.
Yeah.
After 16 months of doing all audio and some video, I should be getting better, but I still talk very quickly.
Don't we all? So let's start with the basics, Christy. What's been going on nowadays, and what have you been working on the last several weeks?
Okay. As you know, I'm a trademark attorney. So I say intellectual property, but really my focus is trademarks. There's a lot of different aspects of trademarks and managing brand portfolios that I deal with on a day-to-day basis. And I would say one of the most, as we discussed last time, cannabis is a big thing right now in terms of branding, because a lot of companies are looking at becoming the next CPG, consumer packaged good, and branding. But really, there are a lot of trends going on, not just in the fashion industry, not just in cannabis, but consumer brands generally. ESG, corporate social responsibility, and those types of themes have become more and more important to businesses.
Okay.
It become really important to brands and the value of brands. So where I fit in to kind of the brand evaluation piece and relative to CSR and ESG is when we're vetting brands. It used to be kind of traditionally you do a trademark clearance and availability search. You look at the U.S. federal trademark database. You look at some state trademark databases, maybe some common law resources. You see what's out there and you say, okay, well, this is how much market space you have, or you have none because there's other parties, there's conflicts, yada, yada. Now we're looking beyond that. We're looking at how is your brand going to communicate what you do? How is it going to resonate? Is it going to resonate? And ESG and CSR are huge components of that. And there's almost a need now for a holistic approach to branding. You can't just look at what other parties have and where your roadblocks and your wall space might be. You've got to look at how a brand is going to communicate. What is it going to say? There are some brands out there that do such a phenomenal job of communicating a message of corporate social responsibility and environmental social governance. And they're really thinking about what consumers care about. There's a big theme now with brands giving back, the one for one type thing. Promoting clean water, sustainability is huge, particularly in fashion. So as we, talk to clients about the brands that they've either selected or looking to select or some ideas they have, we're doing kind of a wraparound holistic approach and not just looking at the legality, but also what is your brand saying? What does it say about you? And it's got to be, honest too. You can't say, well, we're, zero carbon emissions and our footprint's going to be net zero by this year. If that's not true, you've got to be able to back all that up. But saying things like that, really demonstrating your environmental and your social responsibility can go a long way for a brand.
So let's talk a little bit about that. So first of all, let's draw the distinction. Is environmental social governance the same as corporate social responsibility?
Not really. I mean, there's some different aspects of each. They're definitely two buzz acronyms right now. I would say ESG is a little bit more formalized. I mean, I work frequently with one of our real estate lawyers, just because of opportunity zones and things like that on environmental, social governance. But the CSR, I mean, different people think of it different ways. CSR, I kind of think of as what is the company doing socially with current events. I think of things like Black Lives Matter. I think of, sustainability, which does play into, the environmental aspect. But yeah, there's a lot of different buzzwords that go around. Another reason that a holistic approach and a holistic view is really important to the brand. And walking the walk obviously is important as well.
So usually when I hear things like holistic approach, I tend to think of consultants doing it. What is the role of a lawyer coming in at that holistic approach level? And what are we as lawyers doing to address those ESGs and CSGs, if you will?
That's a really good question. And you're right. Probably, I mentioned traditionally trademark searches and brand clearance searches and brand portfolio building was just looking at the rote clearance and availability of a particular brand and what risks are there. Maybe there are consultants that do that, but I would not, I don't think, be doing my job if I reported to a client and said, hey, this mark is available. But if I didn't say, you're going to piss off a lot of people if you adopt it, because forgive me for the language, but you're going to, this brand might be available, but there's a reason, or it's not really marketable. It's not going to help you. And if you're looking at a strategic exit, if a buyer, if you're looking for funding, you're not investable if you've picked a brand that irritates people, rubs people the wrong way.
So let's talk a little bit about that. One of the companies that recently came out, I'm trying to remember which one it was. They basically came out and said, we take no political stance. We basically want. Do you remember which company I'm thinking of?
There are a couple of them. Yeah, there are a couple that have done it.
The one that really struck out at me is it was. It may have been a California company, but it could have been Texas for all I know. But essentially, they came out, pretty well-known company, and they said we don't take a political stance. The impact of that, and they said that whoever thinks that they need to take a political stance for work needs. You don't have to work here. And a whole bunch of senior leadership left, and a whole bunch of leadership left. What is your take on that? Is your take that now as a company, you almost have to politically take a stance for better or for worse? And are you therefore by definition potentially alienating 50% of your audience?
Or less. There's so much to unpack there. Authenticity is something, and maybe it's generational, but right now authenticity is really key to brands as well. So again, I said walk the walk. I mean it. Like if you say that you're sustainable, you better be sustainable. And there's too much transparency in a good way. You're going to get called out. There's receipts. You can't say we're going to have this carbon footprint by this year and not be able to back that up. So authenticity is really important, but you have to balance that with saying, okay, we're authentic and this is where we stand politically. And this is where we are on gun control, or this is where we are on Black Lives Matter. This is where we are on climate change, global warming. If you take your position on those things, you've got to own it. And yes, you are probably going to alienate some people. But if you say we don't take a political stance, there's a new breed of consumer now that kind of reads through that and says, well, then are you just a politician that's trying to appeal to everybody? Like, how can you possibly talk out of both sides of your mouth? So people are asking the questions now. They're asking the hard questions. They're looking at the facts. They want to know what businesses are doing from a sustainability standpoint. They want to know that that fabrics, just say, for example, because I deal in fashion quite a bit, fabrics are sourced responsibly. And that doesn't mean just environmental impact. It means, are these being manufactured in a sweatshop in a third world country? All of these things matter to consumers. And the impact on a brand, if something gets out where either the brand was dishonest about their sourcing and their footprint, or They just don't say anything about it, but it gets uncovered that they are kind of sourced irresponsibly, if you want to say that. The impact on a brand can be devastating, and I would argue probably cannot be resurrected. I mean, a brand that goes under for having sweatshop activity or polluting the oceans is going to have a really hard time coming back from that. So that is a very long-winded conversational way of saying authenticity is really important. And I know there's a number of brands that have done it. Levi, I believe it was Levi's did it, Patagonia, where they took a stance and they said, if we are alienating some of our consumers, that's okay, because we're speaking to the ones that are aligned with our views. Now, I'm not putting words in their mouths. I'm just saying as a general theme, Patagonia was okay saying, for private equity, I think it was no vest for you. They were pulling vest, depending on what those funds were investing in. I think it was Levi's that took a stance on gun control. But there are all of these different social issues that if brands do take a stance on them and they own it, at the same time they might be alienating certain consumers, they're really building a following and loyalty among those that are aligned with their views.
So I guess the question then becomes, when you're talking about those consumers who are aligned with your views, I tend to think of consumers in sort of, or not just consumers, anyone. You'll get the people who are vehemently opposed. You'll get the people who are on both sides, and then you'll get sort of the silent majority. So I guess my question for you is, when you talk about the people who are who voice or agree with you, are we talking about a vocal minority, or are we talking about the majority? I guess, and the reason I asked that question is that has a direct impact on your brand, because if you've spoken to the vocal minority, you may land up alienating the majority. And a really good example of that was the Gillette Be a Man campaign, which really blew up in their face.
There's so many examples. Yeah, the Peloton. Was it Peloton? Yeah.
Yeah, the Peloton ad was another one.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole argument in movies where they say there's a whole thing on go woke, go broke. So
yeah.
So there are different perspectives. Right? So I guess my question is, if you're advising companies, how do you help them? Obviously, you want them to grow. You want them to be authentic, be true to themselves.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you don't want them pandering to an audience who maybe at the very best a fringe audience. So how do you sort of guide them?
It's a hard line to walk. It's a really hard line to walk. And usually the way that we approach it is talk to a company, at inception or as early as we get involved in their branding process. Where do you want to be? And where do you want to go? Cast the net? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And where do you want to be in 10 years? And be obnoxious. Tell me. And believe me, I've heard it. We're going to be a unicorn. And then everybody's, we're the next Uber. Okay, well, no, but what are your ambitions and what is your plan? Because it's a very different thing to me if a brand says, we want to remain cult brand, have a cult following, our loyal consumers. We want to stay kind of not under the radar, because obviously they want to make money. But we want to kind of be not mainstream, but have a cult following and speak to our truth and our consumers. And that works for us. Compare that with the businesses that maybe they're startup and maybe they're small and have a cult following, but their ambition is to be purchased by, say it's like a craft brew, and they want AB InBev knocking on their door to buy them. Or they want private equity money, or they want, a strategic buy, whatever it might be. So it's really like kind of looking at your trajectory and how might your brand selection and your brand messaging limit you, or how might it position you for growth? The word scalability, I know it's a buzzword, but it really is significant, because there are clients that come to me and they start off as, say it's a cosmetics brand, or it's a small fashion brand or something small, and they have their cult following, but their idea and their ambitions are to grow into a lifestyle brand that could be purchased by one of the major fashion houses or one of the major kind of conglomerates. If that's their goal, they might want to be a little bit more neutral about their messaging, right? So it's really how risk tolerant are you, and what are your goals and ambitions? And unfortunately, some of the businesses, when they come to me and it's at a start and they're startup, minded, always envision, well, it's the three of us, and it's always going to be the three of us, and we're always going to do this, and we're always going to be aligned. And then, money talks. Sometimes dollar signs come along, and there's a changed vision, and there's a sale, and then there's a change at the, organizational level. So you lose a little bit of authenticity and a little bit of like personal touch on the brand there. But it's really about a brand's goals and future and ambition in terms of what the messaging is coming out of the gate.
So I'm going to translate what you just said more from the consumer product branding level to the pharma level. I don't know how much you work in pharma, but do you do a significant amount of work?
A bit. Yeah.
Perfect. So I'm not talking about any company in specific, but let's say you had a orphan disease state, or you had a rare disease product. Do you advise these companies to be more out there with their messaging, mostly because it speaks to their, assuming they're authentic, it speaks to their purpose, and they're not looking to grow into the next Pfizer, not because Pfizer wouldn't buy them, but because their organization is by definition a rare disease state organization. So speaking out to those values speaks a little bit better. And conversely, if you work for a Pfizer, would you tell them to be more neutral, if you will, for lack of a better term?
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if you work for Pfizer.
No, no, I got the vaccine though. Big fan right now. No, it again, it comes down to the consumers. They're going to have to look at who are the consumers. Who are they going to be marketing to? Is it going to be, if it's a smaller, specific, like one drug, I don't want to call them a one-trick pony, but like a one drug company. If they want to attract the likes of a Pfizer, a Merck, a big pharma company, maybe their messaging should be a little bit more neutral. But if they want to continue independently, which is probably hard to do from a financial standpoint anyway, to fund the research, the development, the clinical trials, the marketing, the getting the pharmaceutical marketers into the right places, into the right doctor's offices. And so, if it's scalable, or if it's doable and sustainable at a small level, and they're at their core and their value and what's made them kind of attractive to their consumers is that they have their own authentic views, and they are comfortable being open about them, it might work for them. But again, scalability, if they're looking to get purchased by a big pharma company, they might not want to openly voice an opinion that might be less popular with one of those bigger companies.
So I think that's kind of interesting. It opens up a interesting can of worms, in that when I think about corporate social responsibility, I think about you're talking about a cause that's typically national. You're talking about a cause that's global sometimes. But one of the things I'm seeing more and more is, at least in the pharma world, this whole angle of patient centricity. And what that really translates into is pharma working and trying to address individual patients' needs in a compliant way, and that has its own problems for sure. But that's their goal. Yeah. I guess my question for you is, when you're talking CSR or you're talking ESG, are you typically advising them at a global level or a national level, or are you kind of going, let's also look at your plans at a more local level and at a more individual level? How does that play out from a branding perspective and a trademarking perspective?
That's such a good question, because it kind of goes hand in hand with that idea of like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Not just where figuratively, but where literally. Is this a product that you conceivably would market outside of the United States? And if it is, and this is literally what I do every day is figuring out brand portfolios, which are like giant puzzles and you're fitting the pieces together. Very, very interesting part of the practice. One brand may not resonate in different jurisdictions consistently.
Yeah.
So there are companies that we will say, okay, well, if your plan is to expand into mostly English speaking jurisdictions, we can kind of clear the brand, we can do the messaging from this perspective. But if you are going to go into LAC, which is Latin American countries, South America, there are some other things we have to think about. Some of those jurisdictions actually are a little bit less prudish than the United States. So it's just a way of giving an example of brands that might fly in South America that wouldn't necessarily work here. I'm always kind of surprised to see what does. Compare that with places like—
give an example, by the way, before you go on.
Yeah, we have a quick service restaurant company that got away with, or not got away with. They use this gypsy marinado guy to advertise their chicken, which probably wouldn't work in the United States. It's like it's literally a chicken that's a gypsy, but they love it in South America. No, I don't know. I just like to see what I'm eat dancing before I'm going to put it on a plate, but that's just me. Compare that with Singapore, which has, a little bit tighter, a little bit more conservative views in some aspects. And then contrast that with some places in Europe where you might get away with more. There's certain brands that you might have to translate. And then you have to think about relative issues as well. Certain words, certain terms might already be popular in one jurisdiction as opposed to another. So yeah, I think, trying to bring that back to your question, we think locally if that's going to be the extent. If you're telling me we're never leaving Miami, okay, we're never leaving Miami. We're a hotel. We're building this like boutique hotel in Miami. One brand might work really well in Miami. But if this client was saying to me, well, we're looking at doing like a chain of hotels, and the next one's going to be in Nashville, and after that, Austin, and then we're going to go to Southern California, I might say, okay, so the Miami like rainbow color scheme with some, different might not work as well in Austin, where so going beyond that, outside the United States, things that work in Europe may not in Asia and Australia, South Pacific. So yes, there's a lot of taking cultural norms and what I can learn about them as quickly as possible with the legal framework and the legal parameters in different jurisdictions, synthesizing all that and delivering it in a package to a client and saying, here's kind of what we see for this brand. Here's where we think we can get protection. Here's where we think we can enforce. Here's where you might want to tweak it just a little bit in accordance with cultural norms. And that would apply to pharma as well. I mean, we work with, medical device companies that are global. And again, it's looking at your consumer, looking at what works and what doesn't in different jurisdictions, both culturally and legally.
So that really raises some interesting questions for me. I'll speaking from the perspective of a guy who does FDA regulatory law, the key pieces that jump out at me is when you start aiming to do things for your patients to build that brand equity. Mm-hmm. One of the things you always worry about is when have you crossed that line from promoting your product to incentivizing your potential consumer or patient in this case into using your product. And mm-hmm. in most other industries, it's not a huge deal. But in the case of the pharma industry, you start dealing with the anti-kickback law and the False Claims Act and mm-hmm. all of these other laws that kick in. When you're dealing with pharma, do you typically come in with the whole team, or how does that generally work? Are they coming to you with a specific question?
So it's usually a specific question. If it's pharma, or more so with medical devices, mm-hmm. which also we got to deal with the FDA.
FDA regulated
right,
company.
Right. Yeah. Regulatory. Typically, the company is going to be big enough that they have people in-house that are looking at the FDA and regulatory. However, there's kind of a common trend, I would call it. I hope it's not a trend. Maybe it's just a theme among pharma and med device companies, where I think it might be the trade show culture, but they like to adopt names and brands that are very similar to one another's. And it's, I believe, wholly innocent. It's completely innocent. It's almost like they go to a trade show and walk the trade show floor and internalize something they see. And then they come to me and say, we've got these 5 ideas for, a new brand for a orthopedic screw. These are the ideas we have. And I can guarantee you, I can look at the company's competitors, and they probably got close brands. So, I think pharma and med devices are similar. And, my point in saying that is there is typically a bigger background check going on than just the brand clearance. It happens with alcohol too, with cola. We'll look at FDA regulatory. We will evaluate not just the brand itself, but also the marketing pieces, the website, all the collateral, to make sure there's FDA compliance. And it goes hand in hand also with false advertising claims. I look more at the false advertising because it's Landham Act and unfair competition. But from both perspectives, and that's what I'm talking about with a holistic approach. Like, you can't just pick a name and say, all right, well, nobody else has it, so we're good to go. You've got to look at, how are we going to message this? Are there FDA issues? Are there potential false advertising claims? Are there social issues with it? I mean, and it's peeking around the corners. I mean, it's kind of nerve-wracking sometimes. I've seen advertising campaigns come out and, immediately following, see the blowback on, social media. And I'm always thinking to myself, if that company had come to me and asked me to clear this brand before they launched it, or before they made this statement on Twitter, or before they went live with this Super Bowl ad, would I have stopped them? Because from a rote brand perspective, there aren't any infringement issues. There aren't any relative issues. They're not going to get sued by, one of the big players. But would I have said, yeah, that's probably okay? Or would I have peeked around the corners and said, you know what, you're going to have at least a vocal minority speaking out against that statement because it doesn't resonate well, like the Peloton ad.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would have told Peloton, don't go forward with this. You're going to offend a lot of women.
I thought that was a really interesting. I don't know if I could have caught
that. As a woman who doesn't own a Peloton, I wouldn't be offended if my husband bought me one. I've asked for one, just hasn't got me one. Sometimes I hate to say it, there's a sensitivity that you have to be aware of, but is it justified? Is it a vocal minority that's going to get up in arms? And if there is a vocal minority, is that going to impact the brand because they're so vocal? Social media gives everyone a platform.
Speaking about branding, speaking about medical devices, because you pulled into them, are you familiar with what a 510K is?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. I'm sorry. I think it's 10K. No.
Let me repeat that for you so that give you and others who might be listening some context. Essentially, a 510K is you're going to the FDA saying, I'm so similar to another brand that you've already approved that you're going to approve me using a shortened pathway. And I don't raise any new risks, if you will, for lack of a better term. One of the things that I see with a lot of my clients is they're all eager to go down the 510K pathway because they're always going, this would be so fast, I can get into the market quicker, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then they get to the market, and then they realize they can't say anything new which raises risks. So from a branding perspective, how often do you find yourself advising these companies, even though they're coming at you with, they're really happy because they can get onto the market, and now they're struggling on how to position themselves? Do you guide them on that type of positioning? How do you sort of advise them? That's
such a good question. The FDA actually is one of the main reasons that the United States Patent and Trademark Office has what's called the intent to use filing system. So the United States is it's a use-based jurisdiction. So you have trademark rights, brand rights from inception, from the time you put a mark on a product that is offered, transported in commerce, long story, legal language. But they allow you to file what's called an intent to use application. And the main reason, I believe, was because of drugs, in the pharma industry, that were not yet approved, but they wanted to secure the brand rights. They file an application, go through the FDA approval process, and then ultimately, once they're approved, they get the brand registered. But not only that, they get what's called a constructive first use date in the US, priority's king, back to the filing date. So the whole FDA approval process is obviously very significant to brands and significant to the branding and official branding process before the US Patent and Trademark Office. The 510K, I didn't put a label on it, but I have had clients ask me about that. I hear you talk about it, and my brain immediately goes to, if I ever had an infringement case, that would be a great piece of evidence if I had two brands that were somewhat close and I needed to show like motive, opportunity, intent to infringe, and intent is a factor. Because if they said, well, we're going to ride in on this brand's coattails, that says to me, well, you had awareness and knowledge, and willfulness is also plays a part, less so in damages now after the recent Supreme Court ruling. But I would use that as evidence to say, well, you're using somebody else's clear path. And that exact theme is what's codified in the Lanham Act under unfair competition is you cannot trade on the goodwill that somebody else has built up. And that is the definition of trademark infringement, right? You take and adopt a brand that's confusingly similar to somebody else's, and you're literally riding on their coattails. You are usurping, is the language, the goodwill established by the brand. And that's the argument we make whenever we're on the complaining plaintiff side against trademark infringement is, we've spent X amount of dollars on marketing, X amount of dollars on advertising. Our sales revenues are this. We've had continuous exclusive use for the last 5+ years. Our brand is strong. And then here comes this party that just adopts something similar. And by virtue of the fact that people think either it's an offshoot of ours or it's approved or licensed by us, they trade on our goodwill. So I know it's kind of like maybe a stretch of an analogy. There's definitely a common theme there on like the goodwill and the trading on somebody else's goodwill. So, under the FDA, I guess I get it, because there's a consumer need, there's a public need served by getting drugs to the market faster.
This is devices, but yes,
with branding, you've literally got an infringement case there. So
I'm going to give you this. I think this is today's news, if I remember correctly. I can't keep track of days anymore, but today's news was there was a FDA approved drug. And do you know what a compounding pharmacy is?
No.
Okay. Compounding pharmacy. Pharmacists are allowed by law to make individual customized medications for.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So
a pharmacist would have to do that, right, under their license?
I'm sorry.
A pharmacist would have to be licensed to do that.
Correct. Absolutely. So essentially, they were compounding medications that were approved by the FDA. And the company came out and sued them, saying that you're not allowed to do this. Interestingly enough, today's court case, if I remember correctly, came out and said they sued under the Landham Act, saying that this could be an issue under the Landham Act. And today's news was the court said, we're going to leave it for the FDA to decide and not confuse this using the Landham Act. But I thought that was very, very on point for the discussion we're having.
That is, because the compounding, I'm not familiar with it, but I think I can, assume enough to be dangerous. The compounding, so maybe you're taking two generics, but more likely you're taking two brand name drugs, right?
No. So it's something like this. So aspirin, for argument's sake, right? So let's say aspirin was out there. I'm making aspirin. I'm charging you $10,000 for the aspirin tablet, right? I'm a compounding pharmacist. I can technically go buy aspirin off the raw materials for aspirin and compound an aspirin tablet for you, and then sell it to your patients for $100 instead of the $10,000.
Yeah.
And I'm allowed to do that under my license, but the FDA has come out and basically said that you can do that in only specific circumstances. And I've actually had several clients reach out to me about something similar, and I've always told them that this might be an opportunity. But today's court case is kind of interesting. But the point being, the FDA is so overwhelmed right now with COVID and everything like that. they've basically not been taking action for the compounder against the compounders.
Okay.
While the pharma company who's charging $10,000 is going, I put in a bunch of money towards this. Patients are going, I don't want to pay you $10,000 if I can get the same thing for $100.
Right.
So the question was, could you bring a case under the Landham Act?
You could. You probably have.
In that jurisdiction, it was problematic.
Yeah, you would probably have a first sale doctrine issue. Would you have consumer confusion because you're essentially reselling it? There's a lot of issues that would raise. I mean, you would have a Lanham Act claim. You could articulate clear claims that would probably survive a motion to dismiss, but I do think you'd have defenses under first sale. Now, if you rebranded the product,
let's say you called it something different. So instead of aspirin, you called it.
Right.
Was that something else?
Yeah.
But you have to still put the generic name on it. So acetylsalicylic acid will still be on there.
Right. So then it could be passing off. You're taking one product, passing it off as another. There's a lot of, but it's interesting to look at it from a Lanham Act perspective. Again, that's an interesting case too, because you'd have a balance of the public need, right?
Exactly.
Say, well, the big pharma company already made its $10,000, right? You know, if the pharmacist or somebody purchased it for $10,000 and then reused it, but yeah, certainly colorable Lanham Act claims.
Yeah, I totally want to talk to you about the first sale doctrine. That pops up often enough, but I'm already well over the time that I'm supposed to actually take with you.
It happens. Every time it happens.
Every single time. But that's exactly why these conversations are so fun. Quick question for you. What is a question you'd like the audience to answer for us?
Oh, goodness. I would love to hear from the audience for them to give an example of a recent brand or ad or marketing campaign that they saw and thought, whoa, who cleared that? Isn't that too broad? I love hearing about these stories because I love thinking to myself, would I have cleared that? Would I have allowed that to fly? Super Bowl. That's why I watch the Super Bowl. Unless you go play, of course, but you know, most years that's not the case.
Fair enough. Here's my suggestion. Just follow Tom Brady. Apparently that's all it takes. Let's sort of do a quick summary. Actually, let me ask you two rapid fire questions before we go there. Sure. What challenged you this month?
What challenged me this month? I should have a good answer for this. I think last month I said not having enough hours in the day. I still don't have any more.
So that problem hasn't been resolved.
I would say what challenged me this month. China was a challenge. And I've had a lot of issues in South America, Latin American countries with branding recently.
Okay. For a second, I was going to ask if you just invest in Bitcoin. Is that what happened with China?
No.
No. Okay. What inspired you this week?
Oh, my kids.
Oh,
definitely my kids. No, and I think also, you know, seeing news about kind of a relaxation and seeing the comfort level. I mean, we're in Pennsylvania, Jersey, seeing the comfort level of people increase, I think, as we're outside more, as mask restrictions are being lifted, as indoor restrictions are going away, the willingness of people to kind of gather again and be in the office is motivating and inspiring.
Very, very cool. I'm going to do a quick summary. During this conversation, we talked about some of your experiences. We talked about corporate social responsibility. We talked about environmental social governance. We talked about the difference between the two. We talked about how you're now looking at things from a holistic manner, and looking at just pure trademark clearances is probably not the ideal way to take things. You talked about the value of authenticity. We talked a little bit about speaking to the consumer and choosing and parsing the vocal minority from the majority, and how do you do that. We talked a little bit about global expectations and then taking it down at the local level. We then got into very briefly into Anti-Kickback False Claims Act type of issues. And then we got into advertising and 510Ks, for example, and really then delved in deeper into the Landham Act. Did I miss anything?
No, but I should have asked a better question. You always said you learned something. What did you learn today?
What did I learn today? I think my first easy one that I learned today was the fact that the fact that the intent to use potentially came from the FDA. I did not know that.
I'd have to research, but the thing I've always been told, I've just never read it. I've always been told that FDA approval was a main reason, and obviously pharma speaks volumes to the U.S. government. So and we are fortunate that we have the ITU filing system.
And I'd be curious what others have heard and what others have learned in our conversation today. So that's a great question, actually. That was my takeaway. Quick important question. Where can they reach you, Christy?
My email is the best way to reach me, or LinkedIn. Both are available. You want me to? I can type in my email if that's best for you.
Sure. Just say it aloud because people may be listening to this on a podcast.
At Dwayne, I can't spell and write at the same time, Morris.com.
That's Christy Campbell or Christiane Campbell?
It's Christiane, but C. Campbell is the email address.
Oh, C. Campbell at DwayneMorris.com. There you go. And Campbell is in the soup for those of you who are trying to spell it.
Yep, no relation. Unfortunately, no relation.
Very, very cool. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment. Please subscribe. You can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter or go to our website at darshantalks.com. Christy, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
Always. Pleasure to be here. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.